Great. So I'm Erik Owens. I'm a professor in the theology department, and I'm director of the International Studies program here at BC. And my field is in ethics and citizenship. And I'm interested especially in the ways in which we conceptualize what good citizenship is and how we wrestle with the ideas of global citizenship, whether or not they're related to each other, how religion and ethics fit into it, how our political cultures are shaped by it and shape those ideas, and how it looks comparatively around the world. And so this project on global citizenship has been something I've been doing for 8 years now at BC in various guises. And we've hosted lectures and film screenings and faculty seminars and things like that. But the centerpiece, and my favorite part, has always been this kind of event, which I've called Global Citizenship Action Workshops, or workshops, because the goal is to think about these ideas of global citizenship, but mostly to see how they're put into practice, to put into play. And we do that by bringing here on campus extraordinary people who are living lives of service and who have had real successes and real struggles. Not someone who's so far away from their undergraduate experience that they don't remember what that looks like, but not so close to it that they haven't made the hard decisions and recommitted themselves to the work that they're doing. It's easy in a way to graduate and a year later be like, I'm going to tear the sky down and change the world and fix everything. But over time, you get embedded in cultures, you come up against challenges professionally and personally, you make decisions that have opportunity costs, and all of them require recommitment and a sustained set of values that help you do this work. And it's one of the reasons I admire so much people like Catherine who do this work, and others who have been a part of this program. We have a lot of these recorded and on YouTube if you're interested. I've had documentary filmmakers, human rights lawyers, humanitarian international law experts, physicians who do global medicine, founders of big public health organizations like Partners in Health, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's a really cool part of what Boston College does, and we try to keep it small each time for a room like this, because that's part of what the Jesuit educational process is about, having opportunities for real engagement at the human scale, and to use that spirit of attentiveness and reflectiveness before we move into action or alongside our mode of action. So that's one of the reasons why I love to do these, and we'll have another one in a month or so with, I'm expecting to announce soon, Father Alejandro Loyo Mendez, who is a Mexican scholar of migration who he's just written a terrific book on humanitarianism from below, and I just spent some time with him in Nogales, Mexico, talking with immigrants and migrants and deportees and stuff, and he's a really amazing person. So we'll do more of that in the future. Keep your eyes peeled. All of you are seniors, so that may be the last opportunity, but we'll continue this in the years ahead as well. So thank you for joining us on what is our 12th action workshop over the years. I won't go too deep into stating your biographical sketch because we'll talk about it over the course of the next hour, but to remind students, I'll just say that Catherine's a 2016 BC grad, and a geology major, or a geosciences major, and international studies minor. That we have kept in touch with her, and you've kept in touch with us at Boston College through a decade of work at the State Department on climate policy, and now having left the US government temporarily at least, working with Johns Hopkins. And so we're going to start by talking a little bit about what your current work is, what your work was at the State Department, and then we'll dial back into questions of how you got there and what your motivations were, et cetera, if that's okay. So why don't we start with your current work, your daily ride today with Johns Hopkins and the Schiller Institute. Tell us about your work.
Yeah, well, and just thanks for having me. It's great to meet all of you guys. So yeah, I work for Johns Hopkins, but specifically at a center called the Net Zero Industrial Policy Lab, and we do green industrial policy. So it's a very small team. We have like maybe 10 or 12 of us. Kind of a startup. We've existed for about 2 years. I just started last July, and the team is all basically PhD scientists and economists, and me. I'm a policy person. I don't have a PhD. So I was brought in to basically translate the analysis that this team at Hopkins is doing into policy recommendations, and then go talk to other countries about those recommendations. And specifically what we look at is like, how do different countries better ingrain themselves in global clean tech supply chains and markets? So how do they boost their domestic manufacturing to be more competitive in those supply chains, create jobs, grow their economies, lower their emissions? And then we overlay it with geopolitics, which right now obviously is extra important. And so, again, it's another form of like trying to help lift a lot of countries out of their current socioeconomic positions and try to help them grow while reduce their emissions.
So how do you and your colleagues there think about the timescales of your work? We have a war in Iran that's closing the Strait of Hormuz, and oil prices are rising, and stocks for renewable energy are going up temporarily, and yet resetting economies and advising on capital investments. These are medium and longer term type things. How do you guys wrestle with time and scale?
It's a great question, and some of it varies country to country. But our mantra is that if you're serious about decarbonization, you have to make those investments domestically for the long term. And one of the barriers is a high upfront cost for some of these investments, and obviously the war in Iran is not making that any easier. But if you look at the cost of fossil fuels versus renewables in the long term, there is just really no choice, no question of which to pick. The renewables are just so much cheaper long term. And now we've also kind of shifted to thinking about how our country's looking at energy security, and again, like national security, and that is a very long-term challenge. So it's definitely a slower process and job, I think, than some of my previous work was at the State Department, which was a little more urgent, but it still feels very impactful, even though it's longer term.
So just to help with the sort of professional understanding of things, where are you based, and what's your travel like, and what's your sort of monthly span of activities that you do?
So my job's remote now. So I moved to New York. I was in DC for 8 years when I was at the State Department, and just moved to New York for a change of pace, which has been really fun. I do travel. At State, I was traveling probably like 75% of the year. It was really intense. And it was great, and I loved it, and I can talk more about that. But now it's a lot slower. We do a lot more virtual calls. I work for a university. We have less money for travel.
Tell me about it.
But that also offers the opportunity to be more selective about where I travel and where I engage, which I think has been rewarding, because I try to like target what's most impactful. And also I'm kind of engaging, like when you asked about what's my daily life like, it's a lot more stakeholders beyond governments, which has been really cool. Other universities and think tanks, but then also businesses, which is kind of like a whole sector that I am really interested in and just now getting to explore.
One last question about this, we'll go back and we'll talk about state and diplomacy. It's often said that ESG is dead among businesses in the current world of at least the Trump administration, seeking out and trying to root out some of this, and that the pressures that corporations may have felt from previous administrations is flipped on its head. Where do you all stand on that in terms of like the perception of this and the reality, since you're working with so many corporations?
I think that there's a misconception that a lot of businesses have walked away from their climate commitments. Some have, for sure, but most are just really scared to be public and vocal about it, which is fair. But when you look at actually where their investments are, or where their projects are, a lot of times they are still maintaining those renewable clean energy projects and investments, but just not being as vocal about it. And I think that, from where we sit at Hopkins, like being able to make that clear to other stakeholders is really important, because those businesses often won't do it themselves in this environment.
Really helpful. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about the arc of your work at the State Department, from graduating from Boston College and moving into the large bureaucracy to your, increasing seniority and exposure to different opportunities.
Yeah, so I got to do a lot of different things at State, which was really cool. I started as an intern back in 2016, fresh out of BC, and it was like fall 2016, so right before the election of Trump won, and at that point, a lot of people quit. So they were pretty desperate and they needed people, and I got hired, which was great, and I stayed there until last summer when my office was eliminated by the Trump administration, along with all of USAID, along with a lot of other State Department offices. And we were responsible for 3 things, I would say. The first was anywhere where climate came up in international negotiations. That was what our team was doing. That was kind of my bread and butter. So the UN climate negotiations, the G7, the G20, the International Energy Agency, the OECD, like any of these multilateral fora. The second bucket was like the science bucket. So we had a bunch of PhD scientists who were there to basically advise the rest of the team, advise the rest of the government on the science of climate, and then also, again, take part in global discussions on climate science specifically. And then the third bucket that we did was foreign assistance programming. And, we had billions of dollars of clean energy, of adaptation, and then what we called sustainable landscapes programming, which was about like saving trees and building climate resilient infrastructure on coastlines, stuff like that. And we had a team that managed that, which is where I started. So I was a program manager for a few years, which is a very valuable skill because in any job, there's always like some project management or program management. So, and it also like helped me understand how foreign assistance connects to global diplomacy. And the ability, when then I transitioned to be a negotiator for many years, and when I was in those negotiations, being able to say, I know we have this program with this country working on, deploying more solar panels, and so we think it's really, like clearly you, country X, think it's really important to push for this clean energy, so let's put it in our negotiated outcome. So it was great, and just on the team also, because I know you guys have different, majors and interests, but we had lawyers on the team. I mentioned the scientists that we had. We had like 1 or 2 finance people who did come from, they were economists. They had like more of a math background, and then we had people who specialized in different topics like adaptation, or then there was me, who was more of a generalist. So we had like kind of a whole range of people, and I think at the State Department, just in general, that's pretty common, which is pretty cool. It was a really cool institution to work for because there was so much creativity and diversity of views, and that was really well accepted up until now. Yeah. So.
And so you were in the civil service.
Yes, civil service.
So for students who know, there's a foreign service track and a civil service track. So that meant you're primarily based in the U.S., but travel abroad and with a little different mandate. Can you say a little bit about working with foreign service officers as a civil service officer?
Yeah, so my office was almost entirely civil service. We had maybe 2 or 3 foreign service officers who would come in for a couple years rotation, and that's pretty typical of a subject matter office at the State Department. But there are offices that focus on different regions or countries, and those will be staffed primarily by FSOs, the Foreign Service. So working in DC in my team with them was often hard because they came from very little climate background. But where it was like absolutely invaluable was connecting with the Foreign Service officers at embassies and in the field, because they could tell us what the geopolitical context was in that country and how it might impact their climate position, and what what the relationship is with the US, which was important, and what the relationship was between that country and a different country. And then, of course, they were extremely helpful in like getting intel about what the government was up to, and like on all things logistics. Very valuable. But it was just very different. And by the end of the Biden administration, actually, we had instituted, I want to say, 10 foreign service officers specifically focused on climate. And we posted them in the major cities, in Beijing, in London, in Paris, Sao Paulo, I think Johannesburg, a couple others. And I don't actually know what's happened to them since this new administration, but we were trying to make climate more of a cross-cutting issue for service as well, which I hope is something that happens longer term.
Right, hopefully subject matter experts and specialized work that you were doing will help to educate diplomats who are supposed to be generalists, even though, right? And moving around all the time, and so if you can educate them in this area, they bring it wherever they go, and that's a terrific long-term sort of process, we hope anyway. What would you see as some of your most satisfying professional experiences or accomplishments over that time at State?
That's a really good question. There were a couple of big negotiations. So every year in the climate world, there's an annual conference that happens in the fall. It's hosted by a different country, and all throughout the year, you're prepping as the negotiating team. You're prepping for that conference. You're meeting with other countries to discuss positions, to discuss the outcome. There's like a mid-year negotiation in the summer where you get started on some of that. And the issue that I was responsible for was called Just Transition, which is all about socioeconomic impacts of climate action. So, how are you helping the fossil fuel workers transition as the transition away from fossil fuels happens? Where do you put them in new jobs? How do you help reskill them? Communities that are impacted, fossil fuel communities, and then businesses also was a big part of that as well. Indigenous peoples, human rights, like all of that was kind of in that bucket. And so that was a new issue that came up in maybe 2021. So there was like a 2-year process to negotiate a work program on it, which would basically set the scene for what happens on the issue of just transition under the UN climate negotiations for years to come. And so that all came to a head at the climate conference in Dubai, which was in 2023, where we were agreeing on the final decision. And that was probably one of the biggest highlights for me, because I got to be in the small room, like in the final group that decided on what that negotiated document looked like, and being able to represent the interests of the fossil fuel workers who are impacted in the U.S. As well as the environmental advocates and business community was really special. And working with India and Norway and Saudi Arabia to get that done was like probably something I'll never forget, and very once in a lifetime experience. And then, since then, that work stream has not necessarily produced as much as it could, but being able to lay the foundations like that was pretty impactful.
I was a delegate from Boston College to COP26 in Glasgow. And I was constantly looking in the room where you were sitting, doing negotiations, going, I wish I could be in there. I wish I could understand what was happening. And we were on the outside looking in, but always very impressive. And to know that the actual business was being done in rooms, and the rest of it was all sorts of things happening that were on the sides and related to it, but the actual negotiating work that you were doing is absolutely core to what the COP is all about, and that's really cool that you were there.
It was pretty special.
Yeah, great. Well, we'll have lots of time to talk more about that as well. Let's take a step back a little bit, and first I'm really curious to know how your experience at Boston College, what it did for you in this professional step, in terms of classes or ethos or networks or frames of reference or whatever. What What did BC give to you or make it challenging for you as you moved out?
Well, BC is the reason why I'm in the job that I am today, like the whole MIC department career. When I was looking at colleges, I was, in high school I did a lot of community service, so I knew that was really important to me, and the Jesuit, giving back to people, helping others, that ideal was, I loved that. And I was on the rowing team here, I don't know, is anyone student athlete? No. Yeah?
I did rowing for a month.
Okay.
It was really hard.
Yeah, it was a lot of early mornings. So, I also wanted to row here, and that's how I got to BC. And at BC, so I studied geology, and then I minored in IS. And we were talking about this earlier, but the class that kind of like opened me up to this world of environmental diplomacy was my senior year at this politics of energy class with David Deese, who sounds like is no longer a professor here, but
just retired.
Yeah. And that changed. I don't know, it's dramatic. Changed my life because I saw we were talking about the negotiations of the Paris Agreement, which had just happened in 2015, winter 2015, and then I took the class spring of my senior year. We were talking about that. We did a mock negotiation, and I was just like, this is so cool. How can I do this? And then a girl on my rowing team had a friend who worked in the office that I ended up at the State Department. And so we connected again, like spring 2016, and then I applied for the internship after leaving BC, and that was it. But it was really I kind of stumbled into that job, and it was really lucky that I had that course and that friend who knew someone at State. That's how I got there.
Was the climate space in particular something that was on your mind before Professor Deese's class? Or were you looking for a way to have an impact or to contribute something and kind of locked in to your senior year?
So I always cared about the environment, but I also always cared about people and helping people, and I think that was more where I was interested in climate, like the climate impacts piece. But as part of my geology major after my junior year, we had to do a field camp, which was really great. We went out west and into Montana and hiked and mapped rocks. And that was where I first saw some of the impacts of climate. In Glacier National Park, you can really see how far the glaciers have receded. And people who study geology, a lot of us go into oil. And so after that, I was like, oh wow, maybe I should try to do something about that. Because it really just, I took seeing it firsthand to kind of make that shift. But again, I had no idea that was a potential career. I was thinking about environmental consulting. That was probably my other choice. And it was probably thanks to the IS program and work that I did that I had even had that exposure. Yeah.
Great. So once you got over the initial challenge of finding a job and getting a toe as an intern, and then actually getting a permanent role there, what were some of the big obstacles that presented themselves to you professionally and personally as well? I mean, I'm not asking you to share anything you don't want to, but more early on in the first few years of a career post-grad, things start to get real, and either they get hard or sometimes boring or maybe misaligned with your values or whatever. Those early years present a lot of challenges. What were some of those that you had to face in the early period?
I think there were three buckets, kind of. And the first was, how would I describe it? Career ladder challenges, which I think everyone experiences at some point. I mentioned I started on the project management side, and I didn't have a great boss, and so that was tough. And it wasn't quite what I wanted to do because I felt a bit micromanaged, and I wanted to shift to the policy side. And that was really hard. I was doing that for probably 2 years. And it was only until we ended up getting a new deputy director of my office who was a foreign service officer, actually. And she and I like really connected, and she basically brought me under her wing and helped me transition to the policy side, and then like grow my career from there. So, you know, having that advocate is so important for you guys going into the workspace, like finding someone more senior who will just lift you up alongside them, I think is really important.
Did that come about out of patience? You stuck with it until this came, or was that a cultivation process? Were you, you know, was it purely serendipitous, where she appeared in your life, or how do you think? What's a takeaway beyond the importance of a mentor? What do you see as a takeaway from that phase?
That experience, just like you have to fight for yourself and what you want, and I think. I really hustled, even before that woman came to our office. You know, I was trying to make connections with other people in the office and do, like, volunteer to help on things where I could. And I think one of the things that I've learned is you just can't assume people know what you want in your career, and you can't assume that people will promote you or give you other things to do. And even as you get more senior, you know, it's super important to just be like very clear and vocal about that. And it was basically 2 years of me like being really vocal. And also I think coming out of BC, which is like everyone here is very motivated and driven, and so I got there and was like, okay, how do I do the next thing? And there is I did have to learn a bit of like humility in that, right? Of like, you're really new to this job, to this world, and so just do your job for a little bit, like take time to grow. Yeah.
Great, yeah, that's very thoughtful.
Yeah.
So career ladder is one bucket?
Yes, so that was one bucket. And another bucket, and that I would say kind of stuck with me through my 8 years at State, although in different phases. The other bucket was like substantive challenges. And, you know, I started at the beginning of Trump 1, so that was hard because we were faced with an administration which obviously was not supportive of clean energy, although it was not at all like what it is now. It was a lot better. Like there was this all of the above energy approach. So it was like, okay to have solar and wind, as long as you also had fossil fuel. And so I really had to learn how to reframe things in a way that was sellable to the administration. The economic argument was super important. The opportunities for U.S. businesses, for labor groups. I worked a lot with our trade unions, I loved that because, again, it's like all about supporting the people who are impacted by climate. And so, but it was hard, you know, and we had to be quiet about pushing for things that were more climate forward-leaning. And it was good when we had a bad news story about the U.S. negotiating team. So like learning how to play that communications game was super important. Like, for example, we were at one of the big climate conferences in, I think, Madrid, and the U.S. and Saudi Arabia and Russia and like Kuwait blocked this report, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report, which is a big climate science report. We like blocked it from being discussed in the UN negotiations, and that was the headline on CNN. Was like U.S., Saudi Arabia, Russia blocked this report, which was great for the administration, but you know, for us it was obviously tough. Because we don't care about that. So that was kind of the second challenge. And then the third, I would say, is like being reactive to geopolitical events, which include, first of all, how do you handle yourself as a U.S. representative working for an administration that you don't fully support and that's viewed by other countries in negative ways. That was really tough, and we were really lucky in the first Trump administration because my team was just so well known and respected by other country delegates, and that was super important for building trust and for getting stuff done. And that allowed us to come back in under Biden and again have that same kind of trust with other countries. But then obviously now, like everything happening in the Middle East, the Ukraine war, I mean, those really impacted the climate world and climate negotiations, because with the Ukraine war, we then couldn't talk to Russia at all. And Russia was a country that we had collaborated with previously. So there's that dynamic, and then sometimes you would also have climate be kind of a pillar of cooperation with a country that the US otherwise doesn't cooperate with, like China. And navigating that was also challenging because, again, like that's where we relied on the foreign service officers to help advise us on some of those dynamics, because otherwise you could find yourself in a really tricky situation if you didn't know like what was happening on the outside. So yeah, just reacting. And then trade, that was the other big geopolitical issue that has been an issue for the past probably 5 years, really. The EU's carbon border adjustment mechanism kind of set off the concerns about trade, and then the US Inflation Reduction Act, that also added to it. So, reacting to that in the climate space was tough as well. But it also was just fun, like every different thing that came up, and it was a new challenge. It was, something to integrate into our negotiating position. But yeah, those are, I guess, my 3.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
When you look back over the past 10 years, I mean, what sorts of sacrifices do you feel you've made in your get to have the career, or keep the job, or to do the work that you're doing? I know relentless travel was one of your features of your job that comes with costs as well. How do you look back on the trade-offs you've made, personally, professionally, et cetera, in giving yourself to this work in such a complete way?
It was definitely hard to have a social life. But my work became my social life. Like my State Department coworkers are still some of my best friends. And I have best friends from other countries now, which is really cool. And even now that I'm not in the government, like I'm still connecting with them and going to visit them. And that made the sacrifice of a DC social life more manageable. But the travel was definitely intense, and it was not often sometimes it was not to glamorous places. So that could sometimes feel like a sacrifice, but I think like especially in the last few years of the Biden administration, I just really tried to remind myself that this is like a once in a lifetime opportunity, and to get to go to places where the average person might not go, either because it's not a tourist place or it's far and expensive. Like it was really lucky. I think that also there is something weird though about starting a job that you love so much fresh out of undergrad and having that job for so long. And in some ways I would say I sacrificed kind of getting to know other opportunities and other jobs, and that did make it hard when I then had to apply for new jobs last year, because I kind of had no idea what else was out there. And I also had like a very specific skill set, which is
it's only one place you can exercise.
Yeah, and
diplomatic,
exactly.
Negotiation skill set. Yeah.
So that that is a sacrifice. But when I started, I didn't think that. I kind of thought I would be working at State Department forever. So yeah.
Thank you. Stepping back a little bit further, part of the reason why I like to host these conversations is to ask like, what kind of values sustain the work you're doing?
Yeah.
You've heard a little bit about those already, about service to humanity, service to the environment, service to our country. How would you reflect on the sort of values that you ask about yourself and maybe need to affirm in times of career change or service, like you said, in challenging environments? how do you reflect on what your core values are at this point in your life? And do you feel like they've changed at all since you set out on this professional journey?
I really had to think about that when I was looking for new jobs. I worked with a career coach, very helpful. You guys should try it. And again, because I had no idea like what kind of job was out there and what I should look for, my career coach had me focus on what I liked about my State Department job and where I saw value and what was important to me in a future team and in a future mission for my next job. So I love that you asked that question because I like have been thinking about that a lot last year. And the three that kind of rose to the top for me were commitment, respect, and empathy. And I remember when I was talking to my former State Department coworkers, we were all looking for jobs last year, and I was telling them about that experience with the career coach and the values. And one of them was just like, well, if those are your values, clearly the government is not is not where you want to be right now. And but that was like, it really hit me when she said that, because again, I hadn't thought of my life outside of the government, and at the time I think we all thought it would get better, and that was like March of last year. So so those are my three. On commitment, I think for me it was always about like commitment to a mission, like feeling like there was something that you're working towards, whether it's short term or long term, and someone or some entity that you were representing and proud of that. So I got to represent the U.S. and the people in the U.S. That was really amazing. And now I'm representing a university, but on a mission-oriented goal of helping countries become more part of the economic ladder for green technology. So that's really important. Like I said, I was on the rowing team here, so I think a lot of my focus and commitment like did come from that experience, actually, because you're in a boat with 7 other people, and you all have to be working together as a team. You have to be in time together, and that's commitment. And so I learned a lot of that here, which is nice. On the respect point, I think that's even more important right now, because we're in this polarizing environment where you can't even disagree nicely, it seems. And so, but that was what diplomacy was all about. It's about disagreeing respectfully and trying to work with countries or people who have very different day-to-day lives, very different values maybe, but like finding a common path forward. And I think, I'm also really interested in like, how do you make climate a more bipartisan issue in the US? And there are so many ways to do that, like framing and narrative, and but it is kind of fundamentally this question of respect for me is, are the two sides going to sit down together and really like respectfully talk about what climate means? TBD on that. And then empathy, this I think is probably the most important one for me, and again I think like really draws on my experience here and the Jesuit values. And but I had this experience very early on when I was a negotiator where a negotiator from Senegal came up to me and was basically and asked like, you're talking so much. You just need to sit back and like ask us questions and listen and hear what we have to say. And she mentioned that like a senior negotiator on my team was really good at that. And again, one of those moments where it's just like, oh, okay, humility, right? Like maybe I didn't know everything. But that really stuck with me, because empathy is about asking questions of other people in countries or circumstances where you don't know, you don't have that same experience, and trying to break down their positions and really understand where they're coming from. And I really loved that part of my State Department job, because I got to understand like the inner workings of like this woman from Ghana who I worked with, and the Saudis. I ended up working very closely with them, and just kind of understanding where people come from is really important. So yeah, those are my 3. great.
That's terrific. Super interesting. A lot for us to chew on.
Yeah.
I'd love to wrap up this part of our conversation by having you reflect on the idea of global citizenship.
Yeah.
Is that a phrase that's used in the State Department, or has been? Is that a concept that resonates with you at all, or does it not play into your mental models or moral construction of the way the world works?
I hadn't heard it before, you introduced it. But I mean, I think it was really relatable, and it's very synonymous with diplomacy in my view. And I think especially right now in my line of work, working with other countries, a lot of them are looking for Americans who are projecting a vision or part of America that is like reasonable and empathetic and interested in engaging with the world and with other countries. And so, that's what I did as a diplomat, right? And I think now, though, like global citizenship to me means exactly that. How do you put forth the vision of you and your institution, your job, and also your country of one that's positive and gives others something to be hopeful about? I think that's really important, especially right now when we're just in like such a polarized country. So yeah, I hope that you guys will think about being good representatives in that way.
Yeah, terrific. Thank you so much. This has been great.